Hi, I'm Mary Kopczynski, the CEO of Regalytics, and here's your update on this week's 10,295 regulatory alerts. The regulator of the week is the United Nations for hosting the 27th Conference of the Parties who signed on to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, also known as COP27. Lots of alerts around the world, announcements, incentives, and more. Whether it's related or unrelated, I don't know, but the U.S. House proposed a rule this week allowing tax incentives on electric vehicles to no longer require that the last leg of the car is made in the United States. The topic of the week is about a little company called FTX. Maybe you've heard of it. So the crypto giant declared bankruptcy, and of course, the news is exploding. But the one great thing about Regalytics is that we shrink the data to only what has actual teeth from the regulators. And that makes it very, very interesting. So this week, the California Department of Financial Protection and Innovation has issued a notice to suspend BlockFi's lending license for 30 days because of BlockFi's recent announcement on Twitter to limit its platform activity, allegedly because of what's going on with FTX. The agency is also investigating FTX, of course, but it's the little things like that that help you really see what's going to happen. Another interesting alert from the CFTC is that LedgerX, a subsidiary of FTX, withdrew its application to become a derivatives commodity clearing entity that was originally intended to allow FTX to offer products that were not fully collateralized. So think of the bullet that it dodged by not going live in time. The Japanese FSA also moved to suspend FTX Japan, and the UK FCA put out a consumer alert as well. I'm sure more are coming, including all of the 50 states and a whole host of federal regulators. Speaking of the 50 states, Google settled with 39 state attorney generals at $391 million for having locations services automatically set to on, violating privacy rules. Google, if you need help with the privacy rules, it's really not that hard with Regalytics. Call me. Amazon, same thing. If you think regulation is just for Wall Street and healthcare, those days are over. All software and data companies, Regalytics included, have giant bullseyes on our backs. Why? Because we make money. Speaking of data companies, S&P got a fine from the SEC for violating conflict of interest rules. Also, JPM and Michaels, the craft store, got fined by the California Civil Rights Department for failing to file the annual report on employee pay broken down into gender, ethnic, and racial categories. And speaking of California, the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation published a redacted letter to an applicant seeking to determine if they had to register as a money transmitter in California. Anyway, in the letter, the DFPI said that it hasn't yet determined whether the issuance of tokenized versions of the US dollar or securities requires a money transmission license. The new crypto regime under the Dubai Financial Services Authority went into force this week, so opportunities abound there. New York DFI is proposing a new cyber rule for financial institutions, so don't let that one creep up on you. And speaking of proposed cyber rules, the NCUA clarified that its new cyber rule, where you have to report a cyber breach in 72 hours, it's just a report of the breach, not a big assessment of what happened, etc. New Jersey's Senate proposed a bill making it illegal to publish voter information on the internet. And they also proposed a rule that all real estate agents need anti-bias training to prevent appraisal discrimination. Also in diversity and inclusion, FINRA is creating a new industry diversity advisory committee. Ohio is proposing a new regulatory sandbox for fintechs. And Illinois is putting equity cannabis loans on the table. So backstory, Illinois has a history of incarcerating people of color for possession of marijuana, and so it has been a really high priority for the state to ensure that cannabis dispensary licenses are granted as equitably as possible. So there are now forgivable social equity loans for $50,000 to $500,000. And speaking of weed, Washington State leads the country in people buying cannabis products from registered retail outlets versus illicit dealers. Good job, Washington. And hey, Canada is investing $1 million in wine. And that's it this week for Regalytics. So I'll see you next Wednesday.